but that don't mean it's a short sermon. It just means it's to the point. Micah chapter 4, verse 9. Now, why dost thou cry aloud? This is Micah talking here. Why dost thou cry aloud? Is there not a king in thee? Is thy counselor perished? For the pangs have taken thee as a woman in travail. This story is centered around the king of Israel, and his name was Zedekiah. Now Zedekiah had been conquered, and his people, the Israelites, had been conquered by the king of Babylon, whose name was Nebuchadnezzar. You ever heard of him? He had just conquered the whole Israelite people, and he had them under bondage. They had flattened the walls of Jerusalem, and they had burned the city, and they had taken the men captive. They'd really taken everybody captive that had any strength to them, that they could use as slaves. And they had taken the men captive, and all that they had left behind was a bunch of faint, weak, really sickly people that they had left alone in Jerusalem. And basically those weak people, those sickly people, they were left to fend for themselves. And they were left to just die out. That was the idea, is eventually that the Israelite people would just perish, would just die out. And then when Nebuchadnezzar took the king of Israel, Zedekiah, into bondage, he brought before him his sons. And the Bible said that as he was bound, as King Zedekiah was bound, they brought his sons in before him, and King Nebuchadnezzar killed his sons and then plucked out his eyes. It was an act of humiliation, really, and the idea behind it is that the last thing that Zedekiah ever saw in his life was his sons being put to death. What a picture that would give us. It was just an act of humiliation. And then the men were taken captives, and they kept Zedekiah as kind of a trophy, and they marched him off to Babylon, where they kept him in captivity. Now you have what's left in Jerusalem and in Israel, nothing but a bunch of weak, defeated, sickly people. That's what you had left. There was nothing but rubble. There was nothing of ashes. There was nothing but a memory of what used to be. Everything was gone. And for the first time in their generation, for the first time in their life, the Israelites were left without a king. They had no king to lead them. They had no king to take them into battle and to stand up for them and to fight for them. They were left all alone, sick and weak and without food and without so many things that they had enjoyed in life. They were used to having kings like Solomon. They were used to having kings that would stand head and shoulders above everybody else in the world. They were used to having kings like David. They were used to having mighty kings of valor and warriors in their life. But now they find themselves weeping and crying and depressed and discouraged because they have no king. This is where Micah comes in. Micah, who was the prophet at the time, he sees the state of affairs that's going on in Israel, and he sees them weeping and crying and discouraged and depressed and downtrodden because of everything that had just happened to them. And he says these words, "Now why dost thou cry out loud? Is there not a king among thee?" Why are you crying? Why are you weeping? Why are you feeling as though the circumstances that you have been dealt has took over your life and left you with no hope? Why are you weeping? He said, "Is there not a king among thee? Is there not a king among you?" That's what he was really saying. I think, as I was studying this week, there was lots of things that came to my mind of how we could apply this to our lives. One is, I think we could ask this question to the mothers of our generation, or the would-be mothers of our generation. You know, sometimes this whole thing of abortion has become an epidemic in our society, in our world. And women, when they don't want a child, they just simply say, "Well, I'll just have an abortion." But I want to tell you, we as a Christian people ought to ask them, "Is there not a king in thee? Is there not a king in you?" You never know what that mother is carrying around. You never know who they're carrying around. It may be the next Billy Graham. It may be the next Mother Teresa. It may be the doctor that comes up with the formula to finally cure cancer. Is there not a king in thee? That is a question we ought to ask the mothers of our generation. And you notice in the last part of this, Micah, he related this pain that they were in to the labor pains of a woman. That's what he's talking about here. And he said, for the pains have taken thee as a woman in labor. He said, you are seized with such fear and with such pain for losing everything that you had. He said, you're just struck with fear. You can't even move. That's what he was saying there. That's what he was meaning. But we ought to ask that question right now to the mothers that's contemplating abortion in our society. Is there not a king in thee? Right now, back here in our children's church, you've seen how many went back. We probably have 10 to 15, 17, I don't know, maybe 20 back there right now. I don't know. And I'll tell you something else we don't know. We don't know what's back there. Is there not a king back there? There very well could be. We don't know the plan and the purpose and the will God has in the lives of little children. Is there not a king in thee? You never know the potential. You never know the dreams that God has put inside little children. There may be kings back there, and I suggest to you there is kings back there this morning. We sometimes take our youth group and we look at it as a place just to send our children to get them out of our hair every now and then, right? But I want to tell you, there's kings in that youth group. There's kings in there, and we need to look at those youth and say, is there not a king in thee? Is there a king in you? I don't know. My mind, as I look out at the number of people we got here this morning, my mind can't comprehend what's sitting in here this morning. God is saying to you, is there not a king in you? Is there not a king in thee? My mind can't comprehend the plan and the purpose and the will God has for some of your lives sitting in here this morning. Don't ever forget there's a king inside of all of us. A couple weeks ago, we went to a youth conference over in Gatlinburg, and we came back to the cabin that night, and there was about 30 of us staying in this cabin, and kids running around like little drunk midgets and going crazy. And, you know, it was about Saturday night, and we had already been through a lot of going to conferences and going without sleep, and I don't know, I just got emotional one night, and I had everybody in the room, and I had Kim and Tammy and Brooke and William and my wife and some other adults in there, and I said, listen, God told me to tell you, you don't understand how important your job here, adults, has been to be here at this conference. Maybe you just came to cook the food. Maybe you just came to help them get them from the conference and back to the cabin. Maybe you just booked the conference, but I want to tell you, there's a king in you. You don't know what kind of impact you may have had on a child that week. Right. You never know. And we may never know in this life. But I want to tell you, God placed something in people. And when you use that gift, and when you use that purpose, and when you use His will in your life, you can accomplish mighty things. Is there not a king in thee? His name was Mr. Kimball. He was a Sunday school teacher up in Boston, Massachusetts. And he had a young man that had been coming to his Sunday school class, but he had missed about 3 Sundays. But something in Mr. Kimball said, go find that young man. The young man was about 22 years old, and he had gotten a job out in the town, out in Boston. So one day, Mr. Kimball went looking for this young man, and he looked up and down the streets trying to find him, and finally he saw him through a department store window selling shoes. And he went in there and he said, son, you've missed 3 weeks in my Sunday school class, and I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to leave you alone until you come back. He said, I am not going to quit pursuing you and coming after you until you come back to my Sunday school class. That young man's name was D.L. Moody. D.L. Moody was a shoe salesman that nobody saw anything in but this Sunday school teacher who pursued him. And you see, Mr. Kimball saw something in this young man, and he saw something that made him not give up. D.L. Moody was an unfaithful member of Mr. Kimball's Sunday school class who had missed 3 weeks. How many Sunday school teachers, and it's happened to me when I used to teach Sunday school, you'll have somebody that comes for a while and then they miss 1 month, 2 months, and you just finally take them off the rolls and never think anything else about them. What if Mr. Kimball had done that? He had a king inside of him that said, there's something special about D.L. Moody. You go find him and talk to him, and you bring him back to your class. D.L. Moody not only came back to Mr. Kimball's class, but he went on to become one of the greatest preachers in American history. And he would shock the world with his preaching. My point is this: it took someone to see something special inside of a shoe salesman. Is there not a king in thee? Well, we give up on people easily, don't we? We just write them off sometimes, and we just mark them off. But many times we fail to see a treasure in earthen vessels, don't we? We fail to see there may be something special inside of that person. And I want to tell you, I'm speaking to somebody here today who you are thinking, there's nothing inside of me. I can't work for God. I'm too old to work for God. I don't have time to work for God. God sent me by here to tell you this morning, there's a king in you. And you need to bring that king out. And you need to make that king stand up in your life. You will never convince me that you are here by accident this morning. You could have been anywhere else you wanted to be this morning. You are here by divine appointment to hear this singing and this message today. God sent you here. And you followed His will in your life. I'm saying to that one man or that one woman, that one boy or that one girl, there's a king inside of you. There's a call on your life. There's a purpose God has put in your life. Don't miss it. He has a will for you. He has a voice inside of you that's wanting to come out. Listen to that voice. God is saying, I can take your talents, I can take your abilities, I can take what you're able to do, and I can turn it into something beyond your imagination. That's what happened to D.L. Moody. It was a cold, stormy night in London, England. It was snowing terribly. And the story goes that the preacher of the church, this little country church, the weather was so bad, he wasn't able to make it to church that Sunday, or that Sunday night actually. And they said there was only 15 people that showed up in that church that Sunday night. And after they'd been there a while and no preacher showed up, finally one of the laymen of the bunch, he just stood up and he said, we don't have a preacher tonight, but he said, if you're a sinner, come to Jesus. That's all he said. There was no message, there was no prayer. That was all he said. Out of those 15 people, one young man who was 15 years old stood up and come to the altar and said, pray with me. I need to be saved. I'm a sinner. He got down on his knees and he prayed with that young man. And that man was gloriously saved, that young man was. And his name was Charles Spurgeon. He fell to his knees and he was saved that night. Spurgeon went on to be known among the ranks. If you're a preacher, you've heard of Charles Spurgeon. He went on to become in the ranks of preachers the prince of preachers. His sermons are so powerful, they've been put in volumes and in books, and they're still to this day on the bestsellers list. I've stood behind this pulpit several times, and I have preached to you Charles Spurgeon's sermons, and you have told me when you left what a revelation it was and how great it was, and I got it from him. There's a secret for you. Do you think that man who gave that altar call that night knew that Charles Spurgeon would go on to pastor at the first mega church in the 1800s called the Metropolitan Tabernacle, which seated over 5,000 people? 5,000 people in the 1800s. That's unheard of. His sermons, as I said, have been published in books, and they're still bestsellers. That man that offered that altar call, all he done was follow what was God had put on his heart and give an invitation for everybody to come that was a sinner. I want to tell you there's sinners in the crack houses, but I'm going to tell you there's also kings in the crack houses. There's kings that's living under bridges this morning. There's kings that's drug addicts. There's kings that's alcoholics. It's easy for us to point our fingers at these people and say those are bad people, those are worthless people, but I want to tell you we ought not to give up on them because there's a king inside of them. After all, Jesus never gave up on you, and He never gave up on me. The Bible says He pursued us. He came after us. And every time we upset Him and every time we made Him sad, He didn't take a pen and write our name off and mark through it. He said, I'm going to pursue you and I'm going to keep on after you. And He said, because there's a king inside of you. We ought to do that to these people. There's kings and prostitutes. There's kings and the sinners of this world that we ought to see past with the way we think they ought to live, and we ought to minister to those people and bring that king out. That's our responsibility. Can I speak to the mothers for just a moment? Mothers, some of you have poured your entire life into those little rugrats. Some of you have quit a job, a great career. Some of you have gave up great things in life just so you can pour your life into those children. And listen, I All of you have these thoughts. But there's times, mothers, in life when you're raising your children that I understand that it's a burden. It gets tough, doesn't it? You want to feel like I have gave up my entire life to raise these children. Can I tell you this morning it's worth it? There's a king inside of those little children. And it's okay if you pour your life into them because that's the way God designed it. Pour your life into them. Bless them. Tell them how smart they are. Tell them how they're going to accomplish more than you ever dreamed of in your life. Tell them how they're going to go farther than you ever went in your life. Tell them how great they're going to be. Those little children need to be blessed. And who knows, they may grow up one day and make more money than you and buy you a house. Buy you a car. That's what I'm expecting. I've blessed my children, and I tell you what, I took care of them when I was little. I expect them to change my diapers when I get old. Amen. Say amen, children. Mothers, you say to your children, is there not a king in thee? Train those children. Bless those children. Pray over those children. Suzanne Wesley had 22 children. And the story goes that she was a country lady and that she would cook in an old wood cook stove, and she always wore an apron, but every day of her life, with every child she had, she would raise up her apron at a certain time every day and get them all in the house and fit as many of those children as she could underneath that apron. And she would drape it over them, and she would start praying blessings over those children. She would bless them, and she would pray for them, and she would ask God to use them in amazing ways and to take them farther than she had ever been. She prayed for them like that. Out of the 22 children, number 17 was named John, and number 18 was named Charles. Charles Wesley went on to write some of the greatest hymns that's ever been written that many people in many churches still sing to this day. John Wesley went on to found the Methodist Church. I want to tell you, she didn't know it at the time, but there was kings under that apron. And she prayed blessings over them, and she told them how smart they were and how far they could go in life. Is there not a king in thee? I'm preaching to those this morning that are facing challenges in life. You're going through something. Why are you crying? Why are you weeping? Why are you afraid? Why are you scared? Why have you retreated into that cave that I preached about last Sunday? Is there not a king in thee? That's the question you got to ask yourself. You may be going through the hardest time that you have ever went through in life. You may be facing some of the most difficult challenges you have ever been faced with. But Micah said, is there not a king in thee? Have you forgotten who you serve? Have you forgotten the King of Kings is in your heart and in your life? Is there not a king in thee, he said? We all go through things in life. But when you have the king in you, you can't stay down very long because something inside of you says, get up and let me do my thing. Don't you stay down because you weren't meant to lay down in the field. There's a king in you. You weren't meant to stay depressed and worried all the time because there's something greater in you than that. There's a king in you. Some of you have lost that. What has happened to the king in you? Where has he gone? I would submit to you this morning, he's not went anywhere. He's still in you, but you have misplaced him. You have not made him the priority of your life. You have him tucked back, hidden somewhere in your life, and you have forgotten that there is a king in you. You don't dream big anymore. You don't have a vision for your life anymore. You don't have great plans for you and your family, and you have lost the will, the desire to chase the will of God in your life. Where is the king at? You've lost him, but he's not gone anywhere. You've just misplaced him. You've got to get the king back in your life. When you have a king in your life, your world begins to crumble all around you, and everything's going wrong, and everything's going haywire, and you start feeling sorry for yourself, and you get into that poor, pitiful me, and you retreat back to that cave that we talked about last week. That's when you got to stand up and you have to say, wait a minute, devil. There is something in me that's greater than he that is in the world. There is a king in me. And I'm not going to live like this no longer. You have to have that about you. David said, Paul said, we are not of those who draw back. That means we're not quitters. We don't give up. I want to tell you, when you get saved, it's like being in a game. You can't just get out because you want out. God won't leave you alone. And you have to sometimes get that in your spirit. And you have to say, you get up from there and you go after that king that is inside of you. We are in the midst of a generation of people that needs to know they have a king inside of them. Our youth needs to know this. Our youth needs to know that they have something very special inside of them and that they can do all things through Christ who strengthens them. They need to know they can pray for big dreams and have big visions for their life, and they need to know they can accomplish those things if they will remember who is inside of them. They need to know that they can go places and do things that we as their parents or grandparents never was able to do because they have something special inside of them. Like I said, sometimes we get to feeling sorry for ourselves and we get down and depressed because we're going through some situation or circumstance in our life. And we wallow in self-pity, and we ought to stand up and say, is there not a king in thee? He knew what was going to happen to me. He knew that I was going to be going through this. The Bible says that he already went before you. He knows exactly what you're going through. Nothing took him by surprise. You ought not to be surprised when you get there, but instead stand up and say, there's a king inside of me, and I'm not going to wallow in this. I want to tell you, as I got to studying this message, it don't always happen to me, but it happens to me sometimes. I've said it to you before, but I always preach these messages to myself before I preach them to you. Because I've been there. I know what it's like to start feeling sorry for yourself and to be depressed and discouraged in life. I get that, I know. But I want to tell you, if the king inside of you has ever brought you through something, I want you to give him a hand this morning. Give him some praise. Worried? Why am I so stressed? Why am I so discouraged? There's a king in me. That's what we need to get in our spirit. You have to be very careful you never lose the king inside of you. If you do, the stuff you had victory over, you will begin to fall to. You'll begin to fall back in. You have to remind yourself you have a king inside of you. And it gives you confidence. It gives you boldness. It gives you the ability to face whatever life throws at you. When Elijah was king, had the king inside of him, he boldly walked into the throne room of Ahab one day and he said, it's not going to rain here again for 3 years until I say so. He had the king inside of him. He was confident. He went in there boldly. But I want to tell you, when Elijah lost the king because there was a person named Jezebel that was out to kill all the prophets, the Bible said that he hid underneath a juniper tree. And he became discouraged. See, he lost the king inside of him. He once was bold and courageous, but now he was sitting underneath a juniper tree just because he saw a wanted poster at the post office that says wanted, $1,000 reward. Call 1-800-JEZEBEL or something. As long as Peter had the king in him, he could preach the gospel and he would say, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. He had the king inside of him. But when he lost his king, he went back to fishing. He went back to casting nets. As long as he had the king in him, Samson could defeat 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of a donkey, the Bible said. But when he lost the king, he was defeated by a 98-pound woman that had some nice curves named Delilah. David was a mighty man. He was a great leader of Israel. And when he had the king in him, he defeated a man named Goliath. But when he laid in the bed and didn't go with his army like he should have and started looking out his window and daydreaming and being idle in his life, he was defeated by a woman taking a bath. Don't lose the king in you. You will become vulnerable in your life. You will become weak in your life when you lose the king. You have to constantly remind yourself that there is something in you that makes you stronger than the temptations of this world. You have to say, well, maybe you're at a point this morning you say, it's too late for me. I've already lost it. I've already lost the king. Can I give you some good news this morning? You've not lost him. He's there. He's not went anywhere. You just have to find him again. Raise him up in your life. Elijah got the king back, and the Bible says that he had such a relationship with God when he got the king back that God didn't even take Samson got the king back, and the Bible says that he killed twice as many in the end as he did in the beginning. He got the king back. You can get the king back in your life as well. Your story's not over. The end of your chapter in the last chapter of your book is not yet written. It's not yet documented. I know you may have been going through a setback and a difficult time, but God sent me by here to tell you this morning, it ain't over yet. If you're alive and you're breathing and you're sitting in here this morning, you can still get the king back in your life. God is saying, why are you crying? Why are you weeping? Why are you afraid? Why are you discouraged? Is there not a king in thee? If you're not in the grave this morning, there's a king in you. He was a young man, 15 years old, with stringy hair, 6'6", skinny, weak, puny looking. His mother was a prostitute, and he had never met his father. This is a true story. And the story goes that one day his mother packed up his suitcase, and she took that stringy-haired 15-year-old boy and set him on the street corner and said, I'll come back and get you in a little bit. He sat there for not one day and not one night, not 2 days and not 2 nights, but for 3 days. 3 nights he sat on that street corner on that suitcase waiting on his mom to come back. They said that a Assembly of God Sunday school teacher drove by and saw this young man sitting on his suitcase, and he stopped and he said, what's the matter, son? He said, my mom left me. I don't know my dad. I don't have any family. He said, get in with me. I'll take you to the police department. He took him down to the police headquarters, and they tried to find his mother, and they tried to find his family. They couldn't find anybody, so this Sunday school teacher took this young man home and adopted him and raised him. That young man's name was Bill Wilson. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of him or not, but somehow one day he ended up in Phoenix, Arizona, and where a man by the name of Tommy Barnett pastors a church. And one day he went to Tommy Barnett and he said, Pastor Barnett, he said, if you would just give me one bus, if the church would just give me one bus, he said, I'll take it around this community and around this city, and I'll fill it with homeless people, with poor people, with needy people, and I can bring them to church and we can watch them get saved. Well, Pastor Barnett said that this young boy looked so skinny and so frail and so weak and really kind of dirty. He almost disregarded him, but he said something on the inside of him told him, I have my hand on this young man's life. So he gave him one bus. And it wasn't but just a week or two he come back and he said, Pastor, I hate to bother you, but if I could just have 2 buses. 2 buses. I could fill them up. Pastor Barnett gave him 2 buses. Then he gave him 5 buses, then 10 buses, then 20 buses, then 40 buses. Before you know it, that church exploded. And this man was driving a bus every Sunday morning. 1 out of 40 buses he was driving, filling that church up. Bill Wilson lives in New York City right now. He moved there several years ago, where his church has 200 buses that are operated every Sunday morning. He still drives them. 26,000 people go to his church every Sunday morning. All because an Assembly of God Sunday school teacher said, there's a king in that boy sitting on that corner right there. Go get it out of him. There's a king in all of us. A fatherless son of a prostitute. But there was a king in him. The world screamed trash, but God said, I see treasure. I see treasure in that young man. You know, that's the problem a lot of times. We look at the outside, don't we? We say they're no good, they're worthless, they're useless. But I want to tell you, God says, no, there's a king inside of thee. Don't tell me that God can't break whatever chains of bondage has you held down this morning. I don't care what it is. If he can take this man and do the things in his life, and this is just one example of millions, he can break any chain that you have in your life. There's a king inside of you. Fathers, let me talk to you for just a moment. Is there a king in thee? We need some fathers in this country who stands up and says, as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. And I use this verse a lot, and I always refer it to Uncle Si. Because when I read it, I always think it's Uncle Si reading, from Duck Dynasty. I think he says, as for me and my house, I don't care what you're going to do, but as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord, Jack. That's the way it's going to be. That's what's going to happen at my house. You may be sitting there, young people, saying, oh, you just don't understand. Everybody parties around me. Everybody just sleeps with everybody. You don't know what kind of peer pressure I got on me. Is there not a king in you? Have you not got something in you that stirs your heart when you're around those people that says, that's not me? Don't tell me about peer pressure. Turn it around on them. When you go to your friend and say, you're still drinking? What? I thought you grew up. You're still giving your body to any boy that comes along? Grow up. Get in church. You're still taking those Roxys? You're still smoking those Roxys? How silly. Get in church. Put the peer pressure on them. That's what we as Christians ought to do. You don't understand, preacher. I understand completely. I'm telling you this morning, you got a king inside of you. Put him to work. To be able, let me tell you, young people, what the best testimony you can have is. It's not to say, Lord, I was on, and there's many good testimonies that come out of this, I'm not saying that, but the best testimony to have is not, I was addicted to drugs, I was an alcoholic, whatever, I got over it, God brought me out of it, look how good He's used me now. That's great if that happens to you, but let me tell you the best testimony. I don't even know what beer tastes like, because I never tasted it. I don't even know what marijuana smells like, because I've never been around people that done it. I don't know what a painkiller feels like, because I've never taken one. That's the best testimony, young people, you can have. That's the testimony to get in your spirit. King Louis XVI was overthrown by his people in France. And he had a son that they would normally kill. Because, you know, if the father left the kingship, the next son would take over and be the next king. But someone had a better idea that wasn't quite as harsh, and they said, you know what, let's not kill him. They said, let's take him to a foreign country, to the filthiest, nastiest ghetto we can find, and let's surround him by sinners, by every sin imaginable, by prostitutes, by drug addicts, by alcoholics, by drunkenness. Let's surround him with all these sort of things, and we'll see what kind of character this next king has. So that's exactly what they did. They put this king's son in the worst circumstances you can imagine. They surrounded him by all kinds of sin. Not for one day, not for 1 week, not for 1 month, but for 9 months they left this boy surrounded by every sin imaginable. Filthiness, vileness, drunkenness. But he never gave in. He never took a drink. He never slept with a prostitute. And he would not succumb to his surroundings. Finally, in frustration, they said, what is your problem? Any normal person would give in to the environment they're surrounded by. What are you doing? He said something profound. He said, I was born to be a king. I was born to be a king. My father was a king. And I was not born for low living. I was not born to live in the ghetto. Listen, you may be living in the ghetto this morning, but you wasn't born to live there. You were born to be a king. And if you've been born again, your father was a king, and he's saying to you, son, I want you to be just like me. That's what he's saying to you this morning. Is there not a king in thee? You were not born to be an alcoholic. You were not born to be a drug addict. You were not born to worry all the time. You were not born to be depressed. You were not born to be discouraged. You were not born to feel defeated. You were born to be a king. That's what God brought you up to be. Will you stand with me this morning? I'm going to ask Randy and Sherry to come up and play something for invitation. But let me ask you this one. Why are you weeping? Why are you crying? Why do you feel defeated? Why do you feel rejected? Why are you allowing something to bound you in your life? Is there not a king in thee? Is there not a king in you? I tell you where this all starts. It starts at home with fathers and with grandfathers. Let me do something before y'all start singing. I want my boys to come up here this morning. Go ahead, buddy. It starts at home. Instilling in your children's lives that they are important, that they are sitting next to a child, next to a youth, turn to them this morning and tell them, there's a king inside of you. They're in there. Don't you ever allow the enemy to tell you that you are worthless, that you're, because maybe you're a little overweight, because you may have some pimples on your face, because you're not popular, because you don't live in the big house and drive the nice car. Don't you ever allow the enemy to tell you you're worthless. There's a king inside of you. There's a king inside every one of us. All right, I'm going to let them sing a song. If you want to come and pray this morning, I'll invite you to. As they play and they sing, I want to tell you, if the devil has you defeated, has you pushed in a corner, has you believing that you are worthless, you could never serve him, I want to tell you that's not true. That's one of his schemes. There's a king inside of you. Amen. That's right.
For miles and miles, we've been hearing the same old voice, telling the same old lies. If you're trying to feel the same old woes inside, there's a better life. There's a better life. If you got pain, he's a pain taker. If you feel lost, he's a way maker. If you need freedom or saving, he's a prison shaking savior. If you got chains, he's a chain breaker. We've all searched for the light of day in the dead of night. We've all found ourselves worn out by the same old fight. We've all run to things we know just ain't right. But there's a better life. There's a better life. If you got pain, he's a pain taker. If you feel lost, he's a way maker. If you need freedom or saving, he's a prison shaking savior. If you got chains, he's a chain breaker. You believe it, and you receive it, and you can feel it. Somebody testify. You receive it, and you believe it, and you can feel it. Somebody testify. If you believe it, and you receive it, and you can feel it. Somebody testify, testify. You got pain, he's a pain taker. You feel lost, he's a way maker. You need freedom or saving, he's a prison shaking savior. You got chains, he's a chain breaker. You need freedom or saving, he's a prison shaking savior. You got chains, he's a chain breaker.
If you're leaving the same way you came this morning, it's your fault. You've had the opportunity to meet with the living God this morning. There's still time if you need to come and pray. I don't want to close all yet. I still feel like there's somebody in here that's allowing the devil to tell them that they're defeated, that there's no way out of this. I want to tell you that's not true. That's just a lie. There is a way out. There's a king inside of you that's much powerful than anything else you'll ever face in this world. A couple more moments if you need to come and pray. We can go on all evening if you want. All right. Thank y'all very much for your obedience, Lord, for being obedient to the Lord. I want to tell you, there's a move of the Holy Spirit in here this morning. It's what happens when you let it all go, when you don't worry about who's sitting beside you, you don't worry about what anybody else thinks, but you just turn it all over to God. That's what happens in services like this. I encourage you to do it every week. And if you would, be seated for just a moment. I've got just a couple things I want to talk to you about. If I could have Gemma, Carruthers, I don't know where she is, and Abe, Callie, oh, Callie. I'm sorry, Callie. I'm confused. No, you can say that. Who else is on this? Okay, Timmy. All right, well, we'll go with these two here. A couple weeks ago, we went to a youth conference, and there was a great service on Saturday night, and there was a great move of the Holy Spirit that night. And these two young children went back here in the altar call and they accepted Christ. So anyway, I just wanted to bring them up and let you know what decision they made. We're going to baptize them, not today. That we'll be doing that here before long. This spring, we've got several more that want to be baptized. So give them one more hand for the commitment. Not just them, but we had almost our entire youth group go back and rededicate their lives to God. You say, well, that's just, they get caught up in emotions. They just do that because their friends do it. I don't care why they do it. The fact that they went back and they made a commitment to Christ and they ain't afraid what their peers think about them, that's big. And among those was Parker, who I couldn't be more proud of, and his girlfriend Sherry. So thank you for every one of you that was obedient to God and did what He asked you to do. And I just thank you for such an awesome service this morning. You were proud of it. Sometimes when you get saved at an early age, the devil makes you doubt your salvation. Maybe you didn't know exactly what you was doing the first time. And that happens from time to time. And both of you made a decision early last year to come to Christ. But you need to make sure that things are right. There's one of these things. So, all right. Well, let's pray and we'll dismiss. Okay? Heavenly Father, we just thank you for your sweet Holy Spirit as He fell here this morning. Thank you for taking hold and taking charge in this service. Lord, it just shows you what we can accomplish as a body, as your body of Christ, or the church, that we can accomplish great things when we just let everything else go, that your Spirit can invite into our heart, Lord. We just thank you, Lord, for the fact that there is a king in all of us. We just so thankful that you have placed that in us. Overcome anything in this life. And God, we just pray that you just give everyone here a blessing. Lord, just take them home safe and bring them back to the next program. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Real quick, can I tell you guys, we've got a table back there with our CDs on it. I want to say a special thank you to Pastor and the church for having Randy and I. Randy told you it's our full-time ministry. God sends us all over the country. I think we did 200 churches and concerts last year alone. And so we're just so thankful that we got to come be with you guys this morning. You want to support our ministry, that's a great way to do it. We've got 5 different CDs. They're kind of all different. One's a comedy CD that Randy All our songs are